Welcome to Dynamic Decisions, where strategy and knowledge turn Robins into Batman. So today we are thrilled to have Alon with us. He is the Chief Business Officer of Instrumental Inc. Thank you so much, Alon, for being here with us. He's helping the world's top electronics companies build better hardware with artificial intelligence. So, Alana, I did a little bit of work to kind of see what you do and how you do it. And what I found was that you've spent your career developing and bringing new product categories to market. And one of the more notable ones was being lab-grown diamonds. Is that correct?
That's right. So I think we should define what a new product category is. This is terminology that's usually used in the software world. So a lot of B2B software companies are going to associate themselves with a specific category. One of the common ones would be CRM, right? So you've got Salesforce and HubSpot and all these other folks. What's different about bringing new product categories to market is that the customer may not even be aware that a solution exists to their problem. They may not even be aware that there's this whole category that's trying to help them. And so when you come in, and we take lab-grown diamonds as an example, that was very different. That was on the consumer side of things. And the reason why I mentioned that was I spent years debating with leaders in the diamond industry as to whether lab-grown diamonds would be adopted. And my perspective was, and I got a little bit lucky because I said, I believe that 50% of the engagement ring market, once we have enough supply, is going to be lab-grown. And that, in fact, is where we arrived at today. I had leaders in the industry telling me there's no way that's ever going to happen. No one's going to want this junk. It's all fake. But the reality is people, especially in California, say, hey, if this is a diamond's a diamond. I know where it's coming from. And it's been ethically sourced, obviously. It's just, been grown in a factory, maybe in San Francisco or in Washington State or in Spain or in wherever, right? Or in India. And the price point is one which I'm more attracted to. So I'm going to go for it. Now, but a different example could be what we're doing with Instrumental, which is people know they've got manufacturing problems. They know that it takes them too long to develop new hardware products. They see that they're spending a lot of money on scrap in the manufacturing process, right? So 20 cents of every dollar of hardware that's produced goes to waste. But what they don't know is that there's a company that specifically built a platform to solve that problem. And where we are today is that there's not a lot of other companies like us, and therefore we're creating a category. So at Diamond Foundry, we weren't the only ones, but we helped create the category of lab-grown diamonds. How do you brand it? What language do you use in your messaging? Why is someone going to buy this? And now let's have a conversation with a customer. So for diamonds, it's simple. You're going to say, is this real? Is this really diamond? Because you're not, or is it cubic zirconia? That's the first question. So now I've got to educate you on what a diamond is. It's a bunch of carbon atoms that have specific bonds that make it the world's most valuable and the hardest material there is really on the planet, or one of the hardest materials on the planet. And same thing goes with Instrumental, but it's a much longer conversation because it gets down to all sorts of manufacturing lingo that we can leave out.
Okay. Staying in the space, let's get ready to talk a little bit more about Instrumental. But remember, decision dynamics, we kind of want to talk about this through the lens of how you navigate the complexities of sort of growth in this tech landscape and how it impacts the decisions that you're making every day. Could you walk us through the journey that you're currently having scaling Instrumental? Sort of what's been some of the biggest operational challenges? And this one you bring up about what happens when you're introducing a category, I would imagine would be some part of that conversation, and particularly in the context of integrating AI-powered solutions in manufacturing.
Perfect. There's a lot to unpack here.
Yes, let's unpack it. Break it down.
So, because there's the decision part, and then there's perhaps the challenges that you face as you're growing, and the decisions that relate to those specific challenges. So should we maybe lay out some challenges in growth?
No, I was going to say, go ahead and lay them out in the context of your industry as well. I think that's
correct
for our listeners.
Okay. So first of all, in this vein of category creation, our customers may have never bought software before to solve their problems. Okay. They've solved problems with process. They've had more people. They hired more people to work harder on these problems, but they haven't bought software. And so we need to help them through that decision-making process to buy software, dealing with some of the most sensitive pieces of intellectual property that a company has. So if you can take a look at maybe one of our public case studies, and I'm using it because everyone should be familiar with Meta, that produces, they've got a division called Reality Labs. And if anyone's used a Quest headset, they know. And I have 4 kids and they are addicted to that thing, right? That's an example of the product that we work on with Meta. Or the Ray-Ban glasses is another example, which I only got this year. And they're fantastic. I take them with my kids skiing and mountain biking and just going on trips. I'm able to be present and take photos. Fantastic products, right?
I bought some of those. I had to send them back because I couldn't put my prescription in them at Costco.
It really is an amazing product, and there's more to come. But now you can imagine that we have access to, I don't want to freak anyone out, especially at Meta, but we get to see the products before they're released. And that is something that's very highly confidential. And so the other challenge that we have is how do we make sure that we're providing security on behalf of their customers and a certainty that not only will the new product not get leaked to the press or whatnot, but that their designs, their proprietary test data, there's a lot of proprietary trade secret type IP that is associated with building these amazing products that they produce. So I'd say that's a second challenge. And if we talk about a third one, which is very common, especially for folks in the software industry, is how do you get people to engage with your software platform if it's a brand new tool? So we all know this learning curve. And maybe you can think of, depending on how old you are, if you're on the, if you're a grandparent, you don't understand how your grandchildren understand how to use, all these new apps. And I mean, everyone's using smartphones these days, but everyone can remember the learning curve, right? So I actually have a grandmother who's still alive. And it's very interesting seeing her interact with a smartphone versus if you give my kids one of those phones with a rotary, I literally, kids, do you know what this is? They've got no idea, right? So that's the simple consumer version of it. But in the enterprise, if anyone who's worked anywhere knows that getting an understanding of how to use this new tool, how do I file my expenses and my time off, or how do I use this ERP system? Those are all challenges that folks face because it's a new way of doing things. That's what we're introducing. So those are some of the key challenges. And one last one is, and this comes to decision making, which is when you're building a business, you have to be you've got to have a lot of, I'm trying to look for the right word here. You've got to be very careful about how you approach different market segments. Okay. And this is across, like in software, we were very focused on consumer electronics, and that's one segment of the market. But as we've gone and expanded that to what we're doing today, for example, in the AI infrastructure, so all ChatGPT and Gemini and all that, servers are running in the background, and people are trying to build these servers as fast as possible. That's a very different product for us. Right? It's a big product versus maybe a watch or a phone or AirPods. Very different product. And so we've got to be very intentional about how we go into new categories. And even in diamonds, I'm just using these 2 examples because diamonds is a consumer thing. Well, are we going to go after engagement rings, or are we going to go after everyday jewelry, right? Are we going to use diamonds for technology, or are we going to use diamonds as gemstones? Are we going to do 1-carat diamonds, or are we going to do 3-carat diamonds, right? These may have different audiences, or known as an ICP, that we need to be very, very cognizant of, and we have to make very smart decisions around how we grow, because that's really the key to growth, isn't it? You start in a very specific segment, you hit a beachhead. If anyone knows Crossing the Chasm, it's a book that every business school student reads. You've got to attack that beachhead to get referenceable customers before you grow. So there's a lot of decisions around that as well.
Yeah, let's stay there a little bit longer, and let me ask you about how your strategic decision making has really evolved as you've grown past different stages. So once you get to a certain stage of revenue, how have you sort of evolved or changed your strategic decision making? And then what about headcount stages when you have so many new people within your organization? I know that you have an extensive background in sort of technical product management too. How do you strategically think about some of these things differently at different stages of growth?
So stages of growth definitely have a factor. I'd say there's a huge factor in decision making when it comes to the scale of the organization that you're running. And let's take two examples, right? So I did work at Amazon on a bunch of new products as part of Ring, but actually most of my career has been in startups. And what I've learned over the years is, as a high growth company, we're only 70 people at Instrumental. Okay, Amazon lost count already, right? It's like a nation, right? That doesn't mean that the team you're working with is that big, but it's a very big company, right? And so one fundamental, I'm really big on first principles, and people have said this in different ways, but when you're a small organization, the first principle is make those decisions fast, have strong beliefs about them that are weakly held, and you're almost asking for forgiveness later as opposed to asking for permission. I mean, as a leader, you're asking for forgiveness of your team later, saying, look, we have to make this change. We have to make it right now. And what I see is people may complain about whiplash, but at the end of the day, it's really hard a lot of times for individual contributors to understand, why do we have to shift so fast? Because at a startup, in order to succeed, you must take risk. Therefore, you must take decisions with a bias for action, which means that you've got limited data in order to make that decision. And that's got to happen immediately. You've got to snap to that new decision very, very fast. And you can deal with the consequences because it's 70 people. So not everyone's going to be informed. People are going to get surprised. People are going to hem and haw a little bit, but we've been doing this way. We got to do it that way. But you still have the capacity to sit in front of the whole company and explain why you made that breakneck speed decision. Versus at a company like Amazon, you're now protecting all this revenue and all this reputation that's been created. So it's not just every company has a reputation, but you could say you're very concerned because at Amazon, you're a target. You're a target of the media. You're a target of the government. And you're also a target of the broader team because you have no ability to sit down one-on-one with folks and make sure that they understand the rationale of a decision. And so the decision-making process at Amazon, I'm using Amazon as an example because I was there, but it's not dissimilar in other companies. I just want to be more specific, is, okay, I've got a really big decision to make as to whether we're going to launch this product, how we're going to launch it, what kind of guardrails we have, what the press is going to think, how we're going to communicate about it, right? Is there a legal risk? I mean, every product decision I made at Amazon was accompanied by a lawyer's, insight, you could say. We use lawyers at Instrumental too, but it's more for contracts, right? But I don't go and ask a lawyer, hey, what are the ramifications of this decision? I don't have a privacy panel. By the way, I think Amazon's gotten a really bad rap, unfortunately. People at Amazon care about privacy more than you would imagine.
Yeah.
I know it's the same way at Meta. Obviously, Apple's very outspoken about it. And so now I've got to make the decision. What do I do? Well, I don't just make the decision and go, okay? I create a document. I create a 6-pager.
I was going to ask do you do it? So you create
Yes, now we're getting there.
Okay.
So, and then I'll go to the instrumental how we make a decision because I want to provide the contrast, right? So we start writing a 6-pager. Maybe I'll pull in some members of my team. Maybe I'll do that independently, and I'm going to start circulating it. Perhaps, let's say at a director level, right, with other directors. So let's say I've got a product. That product is composed of technical features. So I've got some technical stakeholders that need to be involved on the hardware, on the firmware, on the back-end systems where we store the data, on the front end, on the app, on the mobile app, right? Maybe there's design considerations, there's product considerations. So we're taking those technical teams in, okay? But now I've got to communicate, I've got to work with a communication team, a PR team. So I'm going to go and send them this document, right? Think about it. How long, this is one decision. I'm not talking about defining a product. Literally, I cannot say what the decision was that I had to make, but I had to make one decision. Yes, okay?
Just one.
Now I'm just one decision about a literally very simple one. Okay. And now I'm going to the communications team, the folks that really understand how to handle communications with the public. They're going to provide their input. There's a privacy panel that's led by another director that's got a team. And they're going to pick that thing apart. They're going to take a look at that document. They're going to say, hey, what are the other considerations that we don't have here? I'm going to go to my legal counsel. I'm going to have them take a look at that. Maybe I'm going to go to the go-to-market team, to a product marketing manager, right? In terms of messaging. How's this going to look? How's this going to impact our revenue? Maybe I'm going to go to the finance leader, right? Because we've invested in this project. And what's the risk of losing that, right? When I'm done with that, that's not all. I then go to whoever's running the P&L, the overall business unit. I guess we had like, I'd run a small P&L, but there was, say, the overall business unit. And we're going to assemble 8 representatives or whatever, these directors. We're going to stand there. We're all prepared. Okay, we're going to show them this document. We're going to show the leader, the business unit CEO or the general manager this document. Now, one of my favorite Bezos quotes recently has been, I heard him say this, and this is, I absolutely live by this, is I like crisp documents and messy meetings. So the whole point of preparing a document for making a decision, now the Amazon's famous document for making a decision is the PRFAQ. Folks could look that up. It's actually a decision-making tool. It's a very valuable one. It's not just a product definition tool, okay? So we're going to sit there, and of course, all of the directors sitting around with this leader who's usually like at a VP level. And, in big companies, VPs have thousands of people and billions of dollars at stake. This is not like, people get confused about. That's why it's also different than a smaller company, right?
That's
or a startup. And so we're going to sit there and we're going to debate. Everyone's going to read the document. We're going to debate. What are the other considerations? We're going to tweak this. Hey, you forgot to include this other team over there. You should go talk to them. Go take that as a follow-up. Like, go do this. Let's refine this. Let's debate this. Okay, is this really ready? And in the context, like I'll say, just again, as an organization like Amazon, there's decisions, and I'm taking a little bit of a clarification here, that are one-way doors and there are two-way doors. And so you're going to debate, as an example, is this a two-way door decision or is this a one-way door decision?
Went through just to let you know, we went through an AWS accelerator as a company some time ago, and we actually were introduced to Amazon's framework, and this was a big part of it. And even applying that as a startup, is this a one-way door or a two-way door, is a big part of how we operate as an AWS company.
Those fundamentals are still important. So I'd say you could still write a document at a startup to make a decision, but it's not going to go through. I'm trying to belabor the point here, right? I know it's like, and then if it's a one-way door decision, I mean, that's got to go up even further. If it's a two-way door decision, maybe we make the decision ourselves. If it's a one-way door decision, now we're going to go and bring that up. I'll use the Amazon example. They've got retail, they've got AWS, and they've got devices and services, where I was, right? We're going to bring up to the leader of that organization, right? The SVP level. And to get there, this SVP has 8 directors reporting to them, and they're going to review it ahead of time, and you're going to do pre-meetings. So at this point, we're 17 meetings deep to make a single decision, 2 months in the making, okay? That's how a decision's made. Now, let's contrast that with a startup. But before I do so, I should pause. Are there any follow-on questions about that?
Oh, you're good. I will come back to my questions.
So back the CEO and the CTO, and we say, which way should we go, right? Decision made. Now we want to make sure that we appropriately, let's say we're making a shift in our strategy. Okay. So instead of going, I guess maybe you're going up, but I will say in a 70-person company, a lot of these bigger decisions are just handled by the C-suite, right? And it's probably handled over a Slack message, and you're done. Makes sense? Doesn't make sense? If we're wrong, the consequences, even for a one-way door decision, are not that big, right? You think about it, in a big company, executives must be risk averse. I mean, people call them politicians instead of operators. I'll put that aside. But executives have been trained to be risk averse. The best founders and the best executives for a startup, a growth company, understand that you must take risk, right? Risk reward. And now what we'll do is disseminate that decision. So maybe it's at an all hands. Maybe we'll have a conversation with managers. Maybe we'll sit down in our staff meeting and ask the other VPs to talk to their team about it. Maybe we'll send out an email. It's very simple. It's very painless. And this is the exact reason why a big company has to make acquisitions to innovate. It is near impossible for a company that's not founder-led. So companies are still founder-led. Meta's founder-led, right? Tesla and SpaceX are founder-led. NVIDIA is founder-led, okay? But, GE, there's no founder left there. That's a very old company. Siemens, there's no founder. This is like a 175-year-old company. The founder is not there. especially in the Bay Area, that's what we see. So in a founder-led company, decisions can be made fast, even if they're a larger organization. It could also happen in that way. The challenge then becomes, how do we disseminate this decision across the organization that's much larger? So I'll stop there.
Let me ask you this. How do you make the high stakes decisions in your organizations? What are some of the ways? My next question is more, how do you actually track the outcomes of your major decisions? And let's stay with instrumental, how you might do it at instrumental, especially those that are related to things that have to be tangible, like product development, or maybe you're deciding, to spend money on something, and then you want to come back later and see how you're out. How did it all turn out? How do you do that?
So ideally, I'd say the biggest decision you're going to make is, what are my organizational goals? Okay. A lot of folks have heard of OKRs. Mm-hmm. Those are usually more at a personal level, objectives, key results, right? And you could look that up. But especially at a company, you've got to be very specific. I mean, really, in any company, you got to be very specific about, what are my key goals, outcomes, organizational goals for this quarter? By the way, we have a very cute name for them. They're called OMGs, objectives and measurable goals. But we also just call them missions. Okay. And so I want to get back to your question, though. Rephrase your question again, because this is relevant.
So my question is, how do you measure
them? Okay, great. So an organizational goal should be a very clear objective. The challenge is that objective may be a lagging indicator. Okay. So the KPI is the ultimate goal. So it could be, I've got a revenue goal. I want to ship a product by X date, as an example. I want to improve some other metric in my organization. I'll give you an example. For us, it's time to value is a very big KPI. So how long does it take until our customers told us, yes, we see the realized value here and we've presented it, right? So these are some examples of those. And so now you've got to go and peel it back to metrics. So we just talked about a KPI should really be, it's a key product, key performance indicator, right? That it should really just be one, right? That objective should be one. And it has to be measurable. And in dollars, let's say in time, for example, right? It could be a performance metric for a product. I mean, simple one would be like a latency metric or whatever, technical one. But in any case, we then sit down and we say, okay, what are some of the leading indicators to help us determine whether this outcome is on track or not? So let me give a specific example that I think a lot of leaders will be interested in. So most businesses today are into annual recurring revenue or subscription revenue, whether it's your Peloton, your Whoop, or software, subscription software, right? Usually one-time purchases, very difficult businesses to maintain and sustain. Even when you get your nutritional, your soda, or those boxes full of stuff, everyone wants to sell you a subscription. That's because obviously subscription revenue is valued much higher. So how did we do this? So the KPI, if I had to pick one for these businesses, is net dollar retention. So you bought a $100 subscription for me this year, and next year you up it, you increase it, it's $150. That's 150% net dollar retention. The industry benchmark for net dollar retention is 115% in the software industry. If you're above that, you're a really good business. If you're below that, you've got some problems. Okay, but I'm only going to find out what my net dollar retention is next year. So what are my leading indicators? Okay, so this is what we've come up with at Instrumental. We said, okay, well, if we can track the value that we're delivering to customers in hard dollars, in ROI, then we know the likelihood of a customer to want to expand is going to be much higher. The probability is going to be much higher, unless the if the organization hasn't gone through some hardship and hasn't, sometimes you close the department, that's besides the point. But if I'm delivering value, let's say I'm delivering a 5 times return on investment. You invested $100 in my technology, you made up $500. What are you going to do? You're going to tell me, okay, next time I'll put in $200, right? That absolutely, you would not say no. So therefore ROI is a leading indicator. And this is all just based on first principles, isn't it? Right? But then you could say, well, I just deployed. How do I know if I'm going to get to the ROI? Because okay, I want to get the net dollar retention. I understand that ROI drives the net dollar retention. Well, what can come before that? Okay. Well, what can come before that is engagement metrics. So are people engaging with the platform to drive the value that drives the expansion, that drives the net dollar retention, right? And so a lot of times the way that you come up with these metrics is simply first principles.
How do you feel about causal inference on those metrics? Like, so you just described what I would call a causal chain, right? So I have to be able to go backwards from where I'm going to the first metric that lends itself. And then I would need to, that would also tell me what kind of timing I could have before something might actually be realized value, right, in the situation.
That's right.
So how do you actually do that work today? So you happen to know, but how would you help your team to know and understand how to backtrack through a set of metrics to the right one for that period of time?
Outside of that set of metrics?
So if you give them a metric, right? If the end result is time to value, for example, and you know that you have to go backwards from time to value through multiple things to get there, how do you actually work through that process with your team so that you know exactly when you need to do certain activities in your?
That's right. So first of all, I do want to say that one of the keys is to make sure that you can iterate fast and not be necessarily set in your ways. So time to value is immutable, but if I have new information that comes in, I need to be able to incorporate and say, look, last week or last month or last year, we determined that these were the causal metrics to time to value, but we just learned new information. And so I'd say that is absolutely a fundamental. Your V1 of anything you ever do, which includes this causal chain of metrics, is always going to be a guess. It's going to be a prototype.
It's going to be assumptions based, right?
That's right. And then your V2 is where you fix everything that went wrong in V1. And your V3 is really where you start making the money. That's where stuff starts humming along. Right? And so you need to bring that in. Basically, you can't really have this fear of, is this right? Because you have paralysis by analysis and procrastination and perfectionism that keep you from going down that line, right? So ultimately, in that case, the team's actually been really good about saying, okay, well, if it's a time to value metric, where's the time going, right? Let's just take a look. Let's take a look at all the factors that are driving that. They break it apart into increments. It's almost like you could say, same thing with revenue. Well, if our target is to get to, a certain revenue number, let's back that up through a forecast. And if we don't have a forecast, let's go say, well, if we've got, if these are the customers that we have on our target list, I mean, the same thing goes with sales, right? So in sales, you've got a funnel. You've got maybe marketing leads that are coming in, and those are driving the sales qualified opportunities, which are going through stages. So I think maybe another one that's important to mention here is stage gates, phase gates, milestones along the way. In the hardware industry, we're professionals at that. You can't do this agile, hey, let's see what we feel like is going to happen. You've got to sit down for a moment. And you've got to define your phase gates. And I'll say to the extent that a lot of leaders, for example, here's another way that we've done this, like just an example, is every organization is going to have sales stages in a go-to-market organization, right? First, I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to do some discovery. I'm going to show you a demo. We're going to sit down, blah, 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 everything, right? Well, how did we break that down? As an example, causal metrics. Because, okay, you broke it down to stages. How do I break that down even further, right? Well, in that case, we said, let's define exit criteria for every stage. And we know that if we hit these 5 metrics in a stage, right? For example, in an enterprise sales cycle, people know about the MEDPIC qualification is something a lot of sales leaders would use. Well, let's be influenced by that. And someone else figured this out. Let's go stand on their shoulders and figure out what are our specific qualification criteria for that. So now I've broken it down even further. And then you ask the question, well, okay, now I've got one of the exit criteria for one of the stages. So in engineering, this is what we do all day. What are engineers? Engineers are people that can take a big problem and break it down into a lot of smaller problems, and then smaller problems, and then smaller problems, until there's problems that you can execute on, right?
Yeah, let me ask you this. So right now, right, as you guys are kind of moving towards your next phases of growth as a company, what are some of the operational challenges that you anticipate at the next phase?
Yeah, so I'll say 2 things. First of all, the world has changed. You do not grow through headcount anymore.
That's right. That's a good one.
You've got to maintain. And big companies have reduced headcount and increased revenue and profit margins. At a startup, it basically means that it used to be you say, okay, we're a Series C company. Let's go raise $100 million in our Series D. let's go double size of our team and then, triple our revenue. That is not allowed anymore. It's not allowed. Okay. You cannot scale through headcount growth. That's a challenge. So what does that mean? That means that your team, and this is literally what I'm facing today, is someone decides to leave. There's a performance exit. Okay. You have no extra capacity built in. Zero. Right? That's a huge challenge. It's very disruptive. But you can't say, well, I need some redundancy and I need some room for growth. That's what you used to do. You would hire ahead. You can't hire ahead anymore. One, the operational, I just will say from an operational perspective, as you're scaling,
Yep.
and this is more specific to enterprise software, which I think a lot of folks are in that industry.
Yeah.
As well as you are, right?
As well as we are.
That's right. It's a little bit motherhood and apple pie, but I would say, how do you make your software easier to support? Because, and now it's tied to that other metric, I can't keep hiring customer success people to support my software as I grow at a linear scale, at a linear pace. And therefore, I need to make sure that my software can be more easily served by customers. Engineering incidents and escalations are reduced, right? And that's an operational challenge that comes with growth. You should not be thinking about that if you're a seed stage company. That should not be your problem. But that does come with growth.
Thank you for that. And I feel like I have some questions more specific to that, but just in terms of getting to the parts of this strategy, of this segment. Okay. So the way that this part works, it's intended to be fun. I'm going to try and see what your decision-making style is. And I'm going to do that by asking you to respond to some questions. So this assumes that there's a go-to-market strategy, right? And I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to ask all of them, and they all represent a persona of decision-making. And you're going to tell me which one you identify with the most. And then afterwards, you'll answer the last question through the lens of that. Right? You'll answer that question through that lens. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to read questions that reflect a certain persona. Okay. So the first question is, how does this new go-to-market strategy reflect our values and our customer relationships? Are we staying true to ourselves? So that's question one. Question two, what trends from last year's market entries can we use to make this new strategy effective? That's question two. Number three is, what lessons from our past go-to-market strategies can guide us now? What should we repeat and what should we avoid? And then the very last one is, what data can back up this new go-to-market strategy? How do we ensure our decisions are based on solid evidence? So
which is similar to two.
It's similar, a little bit different. Tell me, based on those, which one do you identify with the most?
My immediate gut is two.
Okay.
Here's the thing, is that sometimes past data doesn't assist in future decisions because you're in 0 to 1. So if you're in 1 to n, it's going to be 2. If you're 0 to 1, it may be 1. And inside a company, you'll have a go-to-market strategy for a new segment, which is 0 to 1, and a go-to-market strategy for an existing segment, which is 1 to n, where you have more data. Because that data may not exist.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to say, so you pick 2, let's stay there. That makes you a planner, right? And a planner is always looking backwards, right? In order to kind of see what happened in the past. But the reason why it's so closely mapped to the very last one is the data driver, right? And so the data driver, though, is not only looking at what happened in the past, but what is our current state and a number of other things in order to
other data that we have access to. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds from our entire conversation, if we were to really put it all in context, I'd put you at a data driver, but the planner piece being heavy, we believe that it's a balance that folks should have. So the first one is a feeler, for example, mostly driven by gut. And then the third one was a counter. I'm just counting, right? The whole time.
So here's the dirty secret, which is there's who we really are inside and who we aspire to be.
That's
so
great.
Who I really am inside, who I'm battling, my inner self, is gut feeling, let's go. This feels right. This is aligned with our values. This is going to work. Who I've learned to be throughout my career is data driven, right?
That's so good. Here.
We're all trying to grow, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know where I mean, obviously in tech companies, data-driven decision making is most important, and it's also important for our customers. So it's really good that we are used to following those
Absolutely.
fundamentals.
Yeah. And I like to call it data informed, right? So the idea is that the data alone cannot drive where human perspective comes, but it should inform where I go, right?
That's right.
I don't dismiss the gut. The gut is valuable. The ability to count is valuable in how I apply what I've counted. But more importantly, how do I add data in the right places to really help me nurture?
And I do agree that those are archetypes of leadership, of different kinds of leaders.
Yeah. Okay. Here's our very last thing, and we're going to close it out with this one. So let's think about the future, right? And you're in an industry where it's rapid landscape change, right? Lots of things are changing all the time. Data is growing at such a fast rate. What is the number one decision that you forecast that leaders in your industry are needing to answer? Great.
It's a very easy question.
Go for it.
We're in the manufacturing industry. If goods that are being manufactured outside this country are being hit by a 20% tariff, you've got some tough decisions to make. Are you going to eat the 20%, or are you going to try to bring manufacturing to a country like ours, which is not well prepared to take on certain types, including electronics manufacturing? So we do have clients across the world, but this now affects the supply chain. So maybe my final product is assembled in the US, part of that product is assembled in China, and I've got to import that product. I've got some tough decisions to make. And so those are the decisions that we help our customers make. Yes. And those are the risks that our software helps to mitigate.
What a wonderful way to close. I thank you so much, Alon, for being here. I thank you for your time. Would you tell everyone where they can reach you, where to find more information about your services and about what you do? Let them know right now where they can find you.
Yeah, so anyone can reach out over LinkedIn. I'm all over that. I love also following others that's where I get all my information. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you so much.